my dream for the language that I'm working on is to be able to move the language in the direction of other developed languages. Given the global economy, machine translation will also be something that we can do if we have the infrastructures put in place. And then, of course, the teaching of the language. I mean, language pedagogy is something, that's what I spent my whole life working on. And I believe that what we're doing here at the LDC, hopefully when we're done, would enable us to provide the resources for language teaching, at least Yoruba language teaching, anywhere in the world. Because what we are doing, I mean, I'm not trying to boast or brag about it. It's just that there is no other place, either in Africa or even in the US here, where concerted effort is put into the development of the languages. Researchers are there who would use the languages for research and publications and promotion and things like that. And that's it. But to be able to commit both efforts and resources to it, that's amazing. That's amazing.
It's unique.
It's unique. And all the expertise, I mean, that we have here at the LDC, put in under one roof, I don't think you can get it anywhere else.
And it's really an exciting project, but I'm frustrated that it can't go faster. It can't go faster, and I'm really frustrated. And when you look, people are talking the languages when we go to the conferences and things, you see people talking about machine translation of these things, and your language is even not written properly. That's frustrating, really frustrating. And we only hope, I think, a language like mine has to survive is what we are doing here. Because the thing will be like a pioneer language, and other people will be interested, even larger language with more speakers will be interested and say, this tiny language is important. Everybody is talking about, so some people will be interested in working on their own languages, and that's the only way I see the future of our languages which were not written. We had, I think it was 79, I recall in 1979, we went for harmonization of the alphabets. 1979. I'm not talking about, the 100 years earlier, but just now. And when you look at that, it's really frustrating, and we have to do something if we don't want many of those languages just to disappear in a few years. That's, I think, our goal is the goal defined by Mark. I don't know how he did it, but he had defined it, and if it continues, I think it will be a big thing, and LDC will be the pioneer. I don't think there is another center, doing these kind of things.
I think a lot of people did not believe that LDC would be here 10 years later, 20 years later, and that LDC will survive in the form that it was started to developing at some point, when we started doing our own research and grew into, a big lab. That's how some people called it. So I think it came not as a surprise to some people, but I'm happy it proved, LDC proved them wrong. I know our grants keep coming in, sometimes in the volume and amount that's difficult to handle. And I see, future for everyone who works here and the industry that we are supporting.
The fact that this is still a growth industry, it's kind of surprising that after 20 years and all the progress that's been made, it's still not enough. It's like we're not getting close to the top of the curve yet, and it's so. I'm another thing that I feel very fortunate about. I mean, I'm in a business that will always be fresh. There'll always be something new going on. Even if they get, really sound generic solutions to things like machine translation and so forth, just getting that problem solved for the next set of languages, or figuring out how to collect data for the languages that don't have a web presence, or things of that sort. Even if we're not directly involved in, doing the real, fundamental work, we'll have a lot to do just in terms of supporting and circulating and giving broader exposure to the people who are doing the hard work of getting a better handle on this whole linguistic behavior thing. I mean, it's an infinite problem. There's no end in sight in terms of looking for solutions to everything. It's not gonna, I guess my original frame of mind when I started the LDC is still in a sense valid. That there's all these problems that they're not going to solve them, but people will keep working on them, and progress will be made.
Well, the opportunity and challenge that I see is that the approaches and techniques and algorithms that human language technology, which is an engineering discipline, has created over the last 25 years, now can turn around and be applied to further understanding, to deepen understanding in speech and language science. We can learn a lot about clinical conditions. We may be able to help predict the course of Alzheimer's disease. We may be able to diagnose which kinds of stuttering will go away developmentally and which will be persistent. We may be able to help diagnose and evaluate the severity of autistic symptoms and evaluate the benefits or lack thereof of various kinds of therapies. And there are other kinds of what one might call engineering applications in the future, I think, as well, for example, in helping with writing instruction, maybe helping with language teaching. And I think there are great vistas of opportunity for applications of all of this stuff in areas from political science and economics and marketing to biomedical research. And those are fields which are only beginning to wake up to what they can do with these ideas, but they're starting to wake up, and I think we can play a role in helping them along the way.
Well, I guess one thing we haven't talked about is a work environment. LDC is great, and that's one thing that there's a lot of us who have been here for over 8 years, 10 years, and part of that is because it's a good place to work. You feel like you do contribute. You feel like you're part of something that's not just a brand. It's good. It's comfortable.
So we know that research in HLT, and in fact all research, has needs that change pretty regularly. More or less after every experiment you learn something, and that should affect the way your method grows. And that's also the case for LDC. So even if we are in the same government-funded program, working on the same language, and even doing a kind of annotation which has the same name, like we're doing entity annotation or relation annotation. From one effort to another effort, from one year to another year, or even sometimes within the year, that work changes. Even though it sounds like it's the same work, it changes. And that's just us responding to the fact that we've learned something on each cycle, between creating data, delivering data, and having it used in some experiment. We learn something new, and that affects how we do data collection. So we just have to recognize that and build it into our process. And I think that means that what we do always changes, and there'll be never one moment when it's sort of changing more than another. It's just sort of a constant, there's never one moment when it's changing, one moment when it's static. It's always changing, and we just have to get used to that idea and not really expect too much stasis. But to give you some specific examples, I think that, as I said a few minutes ago, our collection will move increasingly in the direction of employing the incentive models and the interactional models that you see on things like social networking sites, at least the kind like LibriVox. I don't think that we'll ever completely get rid of the, dollar a minute for speech or whatever method, but it's obviously limiting, and so eventually we have to get beyond that. And maybe one more reason to get beyond it is because, even things like labor laws and tax laws affect just how widespread that practice can be, whereas other methods of interaction of the kind that you see on social networking sites would allow us to get data from people all around the world, would provide them with something they see that's of value too, without necessarily having to actually exchange a dollar and collect a social security number or whatever. Mm-hmm. A second place where I see us changing would be that I think our annotation is going to continue to be outsourced. So we're already doing experiments with outsourcing of two kinds. One, we have remote annotating facilities. We have a couple of them in different parts of the world. And we're also now doing annotation that's diffuse. So it's not just that there's another annotation group in Tunis, as there is, but it's also the case for some annotations, the annotators are all over the world already. We're already using Mechanical Turk. And we're already doing things that are Mechanical Turk-like without using Mechanical Turk, using our own infrastructure. I think that's going to increase, and I think really that's another goal for us, is to try to make our training and our evaluation of staff efficient enough that we can afford to bring people on for any language, regardless of where they are, train them to do a kind of annotation task, and then evaluate whether they're doing it really quickly without having to have them physically here in Philadelphia. That's a challenge for us.
So, as you see, I know the beginning. I don't know what the end is. This is, I think, my 12th year, if I'm not wrong, by November. And it has been fun. It has been really fun. LDC has, to me, has the feeling of a family. It's that kind of an atmosphere where people are not official. I stopped using a tie ever since 2001. It's relaxed. The speed is not, necessarily relaxed. I mean, the amount of work that we get and, the deadlines and all that are usually, very pressing. But the work I'm doing is interesting and keeps me on my toes, but also it keeps me fascinated and interested. And I think that the day that stops, you probably will not see me here. So for the moment, things are fine. And I'm enjoying what I'm doing and enjoying LDC. And hopefully it will go in the direction where it will always keep, the contact with the university there. That's an important side, because that brings the real research, that brings the interest, not only in just providing an annotation and, resources for people who are going to use them, but also keeps us thinking about what's the future of those resources. How can we make more resources? How can we get into, new territories and new, levels of work on language that would really be, kind of more promising for the users, those who do natural language processing and human technologies. So that's what I have to tell you.